Welcome to your friendly neighborhood historian, where we discuss just enough history to inform, intrigue, and entertain. I'm Bill Petro. The history of presidential inaugurations. Why are they on January the 20th? It wasn't always this way. In 1933, it seemed that a 4-month transition between an outgoing lame duck president who was voted out in November and a new administration starting in March was too long. Indeed, during the winter of 1932 through 33, a horrific battle between the incumbent Herbert Hoover and President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt complicated FDR's ability to deal with the failed economy resulting from the Great Depression. The 20th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted in 1933 to move the presidential inauguration and its corresponding end date of term service from March 4th to noon on January 20th. The amendment also made provisions should a president die during his term, resign, or be removed from office. And presidential transitions were not always smooth. How have presidential inaugurations changed throughout American history? What's the official oath of office? Where is it done? And what have been some of the more novel presidential inaugurations? It was not until the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 that all the current processes to effect a peaceful transition of power were put in place. This includes providing candidates nominated by the major parties with classified national security briefings, transition services, facilities, offices, and equipment. The new compressed 11-week timetable made every moment count. If things get complicated, that amount of time can seem tight. We now observe the 60th presidential inauguration. During the Obama inauguration, social media played a large part. This drove exponential growth in information generated at that time. Today, we get most of our news via social media, with podcasts, including mine, and not as much from newspapers, radio, and television. Inauguration locations. In modern times, the west front of the U.S. Capitol is the usual site for the inauguration and swearing-in ceremony at noon, unless January the 20th falls on a Sunday. It's been used on 56 occasions, but there are over a dozen other places where the president has been sworn into office by taking the presidential oath. However, due to dangerously cold weather this year, the inauguration will be held inside the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. This was done 40 years ago for the same reason, in 1985 for Ronald Reagan. What is the presidential oath that is taken? While there have been several versions of the oath of office taken since the first one in 1789, since 1884, the following has been used. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The American author Washington Irving, in his biography of George Washington, relates that Washington added the words, "So help me God." But this is not part of the constitutionally mandated oath of office for the president. It was more likely a personal prayer. However, it seems to have become traditional. No book is required to swear upon, although historically it is done by raising the right hand and placing the left hand on the Bible. Nevertheless, some other books have been used during presidential inaugurations. Here are some novel presidential inaugurations, some factoids from American history with which to impress your friends and family during this inauguration. The first inauguration took place on April 30th, 1789, when George Washington took the oath of office on the balcony of the Federal Hall in New York City. His speech was only 135 words long. He kissed the Bible and enjoyed fireworks at the end of the day's celebration. These fireworks were paid for by private citizens. The inaugural ball was not held until the following month, and his wife Martha did not make the trip to New York City to attend it. The first inauguration at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. was for the third president, Thomas Jefferson, who took the oath of office on March 4th, 1801, in the Senate chamber. His speech was printed as an extra in the newspaper National Intelligencer. James Monroe, on March 5th, 1817, was the first to be sworn in wearing long trousers. All his predecessors wore colonial-era breeches and stockings. On March 4th, 1837, this was the first time that both the outgoing President Jackson and the incoming President Van Buren rode to the Capitol inauguration in a carriage together. William Harrison, on March 4th, 1841, gave the longest inaugural address at 8,445 words. That was the length of my university history thesis. James Polk's inauguration on March 4th, 1845, was the first to be covered by telegraph. James Buchanan on March 4th, 1857, was the first to have his inauguration photographed. Abraham Lincoln, in 1865, ended his oath with, "So help me God," and he kissed the Bible. As this was toward the end of the Civil War, his speech included these words: "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." William McKinley, on March 4th, 1897, that was the first inauguration covered by a movie camera. Theodore Roosevelt, on March 5th, 1905, was the first time telephones were installed on the Capitol grounds for an inauguration. Warren G. Harding, on March 4th, 1921, was the first to use loudspeakers at inauguration. Calvin Coolidge, on March 4th, 1925, was the first inaugural to be broadcast nationally by radio. Herbert Hoover, on March 4th, 1929, was the first inaugural covered by a talking newsreel. Franklin D. Roosevelt, on January 20th, 1937, was the first president inaugurated on the new date stipulated by the 20th Amendment of the Constitution. The first and only president who was inaugurated for a fourth term, thereafter restricted by the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution passed in 1951. He said during his inauguration speech in reference to the Great Depression, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Harry S. Truman, on January 20th, 1947, was the first inauguration to be televised. John F. Kennedy, on January 20th, 1961, was the first inauguration televised in color. He said in his speech, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Lyndon B. Johnson, on November 22nd, 1963, was the first president to be sworn in on an airplane as he was flying following the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. Gerald R. Ford, on August 4th, 1974, was the first vice president to become president based on the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, in accordance with the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon. Ronald Reagan, on January 20th, 1985, was the first time a television camera was placed inside the presidential limousine from the Capitol to the White House. It was the first closed-caption television broadcast for the deaf and hard of hearing. Bill Clinton, on January 20th, 1997, was the first ceremony broadcast live on the Internet. Barack Obama, on January 20th, 2009, was the first inauguration covered by major social media networks. Thank you for listening. I'm Bill Petro, your friendly neighborhood historian. You can find more details on this topic and others on my website at billpetro.com.